So today, we are diving into a really thought-provoking idea called BioIslam. It's a framework that claims to offer a prescription for some of the biggest challenges facing the global Muslim community. The source material we're looking at asks a pretty bold question. What if the key to a better future for over 1 billion people isn't just about politics or economics, but about a whole new way of looking at faith itself? Let's get into it.
All right, so let's start with the question that really kicks this whole thing off. It's a tough one, and it's massive in scale. Why is it that in a world with more wealth than ever before, so many in the Muslim ummah, a community of well over 1 billion people, are still living in deep poverty? And this is where it gets really startling. Now, you might have heard that the percentage of people in extreme poverty has gone down globally, and that's true. But the research we're examining asks us to look at the raw numbers. And when you do that, the picture changes. The actual number of people in extreme poverty has more than doubled since 1800. We're not just talking about a statistic here. This represents a huge amount of human suffering, and it begs for a real explanation.
So that staggering number is really the starting point for the diagnosis we're looking at today. This framework argues that poverty isn't some isolated issue. No, it's actually the most obvious symptom of a much deeper crisis, a crisis made up of 5 big problems that are all tangled up with each other.
And here they are what the source calls the Big Five. Think of it like a chain reaction. It starts with poverty. That poverty then creates a brain drain where the best and brightest have to leave to find opportunities. In that vacuum, authoritarianism can take root because repressive systems thrive when people don't have other options. Then you have patriarchy, which holds back half the population from reaching their potential. And the whole thing is set on fire by politicization, where religion is twisted into a weapon for power and conflict. You see, they're not separate issues. They feed each other in this vicious cycle that's almost impossible to escape.
Now, out of all those problems, the source tells us to pay very close attention to the brain drain. Why that one? Well, because it's seen as the linchpin holding the whole structure together. This quote really nails it. It's not just that people are leaving, it's who is leaving. We're talking about the critical thinkers, the innovators, the scientists. And when they look at traditional interpretations of faith and find them, well, uninspiring, they don't just pack their bags and leave the country. Sometimes they quietly leave the faith altogether, and their incredible problem-solving skills go with them.
Okay, so if that's the crisis we're facing now, what's the diagnosis? How did we even get here? To really get the proposed solution, we have to first understand the source's take on the historical roots that let these 5 big problems get so deep.
This brings us to a really crucial term you have to understand for this argument: taqlid. Now, at its core, taqlid is about the pious imitation of past scholars, following the precedents they set. It comes from a place of deep respect for tradition and heritage. But the source poses a challenging question. What happens when that respect for the past accidentally becomes a roadblock for the future? The argument here is that an over-reliance on taqlid, on imitation, can end up stifling the very creativity and new ideas needed to solve today's problems. And this is where the role of the ulama, the traditional religious scholars, comes into the analysis. To make its point, the source uses a powerful historical example: the printing press. For almost 300 years after it was invented, this revolutionary technology was forbidden in the Ottoman Empire. Just think about that for a second. The missed opportunities, the ideas that never spread, the progress that was stalled. The analysis we're looking at argues that this one decision created ripples that we can still feel today. And this slide just lays it all out, right? It draws a straight line. On one side, you have resistance to a game-changing technology, all in the name of preserving traditional ways. And on the other side, the direct impact. You slow down the creation and spread of new ideas. According to this framework, that's the absolute main engine for getting out of poverty. So this isn't just some interesting history fact. It's presented as the core reason for the slowdown in progress.
Okay, so we've gone through this pretty tough diagnosis of the problems and their history. But the research doesn't just stop there. It pivots from diagnosis to prescription, and it proposes a new path forward, a framework designed to flip those negative trends on their head. It's called BioIslam.
So what is BioIslam exactly? Well, it's pitched as a kind of scientific Islam. The main idea is to build a bridge between 2 worlds that are often seen as being in conflict: the world of faith, which often requires acceptance, and the world of science, which demands proof and constant questioning. It's about creating a space where you can be a person of deep faith and a rigorous analytical thinker without any contradiction.
And this next quote, wow, it really gets to the core of the whole philosophy. It's a powerful reminder that our greatest resource isn't oil, it's not gold, it's ideas. Because unlike a barrel of oil, you can share an idea with 1 million people, and not only do you still have it, but it actually gets stronger. This is the engine that drives BioIslam, the belief that sparking an intellectual renewal is the real key to a more prosperous future.
And this reveals the whole strategy. I mean, how do you tackle 5 huge tangled problems at once? Well, the argument here is you don't. You have to find the leverage point, the first domino. And for BioIslam, that first domino is the brain drain. The logic is pretty straightforward. If you can create an approach to Islam that is intellectually exciting and compatible with science, you can win back the hearts and minds of the community's brightest. And once you have those innovators back on board, well, now you've got the intellectual firepower to start solving the other 4 problems.
So let's get into the mechanics of it. How does BioIslam actually work? The bio part is actually an acronym. It stands for Built Inside Out. And this philosophy has 2 key dimensions that really define its entire approach. Okay, so the first dimension of this inside-out idea is all about spiritual knowledge. The methodology here is strictly Quran-centric. It proposes going deep inside the Quran itself to find its core principles, without relying on what it calls outside sources. And that's a pretty big shift from traditional methods, which heavily rely on sources like the Hadith collections, the recorded sayings and actions of the Prophet Muhammad, as a primary source for guidance and law.
Then we have the second inside-out dimension, which is about human behavior. The focus here shifts away from exterior conformity, the outward signs of being religious, and puts all the emphasis on interior piety. There's a beautiful Quranic word for this, taqwa. It's about your inner consciousness, your God awareness. The argument is that true faith is what's on the inside, and that focusing too much on external performance can sometimes miss the point.
This table really puts everything side by side, and you can see just how different the approaches are presented to be. I mean, look at the shift in every single category. The sources become more focused. The focus of piety moves from outside to inside. The whole approach to knowledge moves from imitation to inquiry. And maybe the biggest one of all is the guiding goal. It shifts from preserving tradition to actively maximizing human potential. According to the source, this isn't just tweaking a few things, it's a fundamental change in mindset.
So what's the end game here? Where does all of this lead? The ultimate vision is for what the source material calls a vio-humanistic outcome. That's a big word, but it just means a world where faith in God and the flourishing of humanity aren't 2 separate things, but are actually deeply connected, 2 sides of the very same coin.
The vision is truly all-encompassing. It's not about having to choose between being spiritual and being successful in the world. The goal is to build a society where all 3 of these things can exist together. Piety, for that inner peace and purpose, peace for a safe and stable society, and prosperity to lift people out of suffering and give everyone a chance to thrive.
And this leads to what might be one of the biggest mind shifts the framework proposes. It completely reframes our relationship with the material world, the dunya. The idea is that fully engaging with this world through science, art, building things, solving problems, isn't a distraction from your faith. In fact, it's presented as a noble and worthy path that helps prepare you for the akhirat, the afterlife. In other words, your work in this world can be an act of worship itself.
And so we end up right back where we started, with a question. This one, pulled from the source, really sums up the entire challenge that the BioIslam framework presents. Faced with these massive, interlocking problems, it asks a simple yet profound question. Shouldn't the goal of interpreting our religion be to unlock and maximize the incredible potential that God gave us? It's a big question, and we'll leave you to think about that.